Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there was a small and beautiful kingdom. The kingdom was surrounded by green mountains. Wildflowers grew along the hillsides. A clear river flowed quietly through the valley. Every morning, sunlight shimmered across the water. And every evening, the sky slowly turned orange. The birds returned to their nests. The animals came home from the fields. And little by little, warm golden lights appeared in the windows of the royal palace. The king of this kingdom was a gentle and peaceful man. He loved his people. And his people loved him. The queen was kind and caring. Together, the king and queen lived happily. There was only one thing they wished for. A child. For many years, they waited. Then, one beautiful morning, joy filled the palace. The queen gave birth to a baby girl. The king was so happy that he ordered celebrations throughout the kingdom. But that was not the end of their happiness. The following year, another daughter was born. Then another. And another. Until, one by one, the king and queen became parents to 7 beautiful daughters. 7 princesses. 7 different smiles. 7 different personalities. 7 different dreams. But the eldest daughter was different from the others. Her name was Lavanya. Chapter 1, The 7 Sisters. The 7 princesses grew up together. They lived in the same palace. They played in the same gardens. They studied with the same teachers. But their personalities were very different. The 6 younger sisters loved beautiful dresses. They loved jewelry. They loved looking at themselves in the palace mirrors. They often dreamed about becoming the most beautiful princesses in the world. But Lavanya was different. She preferred simple clothes. She loved flowers. She enjoyed walking through the palace gardens. She often helped the old servants. If someone was tired, she helped them. If someone was hungry, she shared her food. If someone was sad, she sat beside them. Because of this, the king and queen loved her very much. But her 6 sisters did not always like her. They sometimes thought their father loved Lavanya more than them. And slowly, a little jealousy began to grow inside their hearts. The king's question. One beautiful evening, the king arranged a celebration in the royal garden. The 7 princesses stood before him in their finest dresses. The king smiled at his daughters. Then he said, "My dear daughters, today I have a question for each of you." The princesses became quiet. The king asked, "How much do you love your father?" The first princess stepped forward. "Father, I love you like gold." The king smiled. The second princess said, "I love you like diamonds." The third said, "I love you like pearls." The fourth said, "I love you like the moonlight." The fifth said, "I love you like the sunlight." The sixth said, "I love you more than anything beautiful in the world." The king was pleased. Then he looked at Lavanya. "And you?" Lavanya stood quietly. She loved her father very much. But she never liked to lie. So she slowly answered, "Father, I love you. Like salt." For a moment, the entire garden became silent. Then, the 6 sisters began to laugh. "Like salt?" One of them said. "What kind of answer is that?" Another sister laughed. "You can love your father like gold or diamonds. But salt?" They laughed together. The king did not laugh. His expression slowly became serious. He thought his daughter had insulted him. "You compare your father to salt?" Lavanya quickly said. "Father, I meant." But the king stopped her. "Enough. His voice was filled with anger. If you love your father like salt, then perhaps you should live without your father. That night, the king gave an order. Lavinia was to be taken far away, deep into the forest. The journey into the forest. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, a carriage waited outside the palace. Lavinia slowly climbed inside. Her eyes were filled with tears. She looked back at her home one last time. The windows, where she had watched birds as a little girl. The garden, where she had picked flowers with her mother. The balcony, where her father had once told her bedtime stories. Everything slowly disappeared behind her. The carriage moved through the kingdom. Past the villages. Past the fields. Past the quiet roads. Then, the forest appeared. The trees became taller. The sunlight became weaker. The road became narrower. Finally, the carriage stopped. The guards looked at Lavinia. Princess, we must stop here. Lavinia stepped down. She looked around. There was nothing but forest. The guards left. The sound of the carriage wheels slowly disappeared. And then, silence. Lavinia was alone. Lavinia began to walk. Slowly. Then more slowly. Dry leaves cracked beneath her feet. Birds flew between the branches. The wind moved gently through the trees. Sometimes she heard strange sounds in the distance. She was frightened. But she continued walking. She hoped that somewhere ahead, she might find shelter. The sun slowly moved toward the horizon. The sky changed color. Orange. Then pink. Then purple. Finally, darkness covered the forest. Lavinia was exhausted. She was hungry. She sat beneath a large tree. For a while, she simply listened to the forest. Then, she saw a tiny light in the distance. A window. Lavinia stood up. She slowly walked toward the light. And after a while, she saw a little cottage. It was small and charming. A tiny door. A tiny window. A little roof. Warm yellow light came through the window. Lavinia knocked. Knock. Knock. No one answered. She knocked again. Knock. Knock. Then she gently pushed the door. It opened. The little cottage. Lavinia stepped inside. The cottage was small, but very clean. Then she noticed something strange. There was not one table. There were 7 little tables. 7 little chairs. 7 cups. 7 plates. 7 spoons. Lavinia looked around. She walked farther inside. There was another room. And inside that room were 7 little beds. Each bed had a small pillow. Each bed had a little lamp beside it. And hanging on the wall were 7 little shirts. Lavinia realized 7 people must live here. But where were they? She waited. After a while, her stomach began to growl. She was extremely hungry. So she walked into the kitchen. There was some rice. Some vegetables. Some bread. And several spices. Lavinia thought, whoever lives here must be hungry too. So she decided to cook for them. The princess cooks. Lavinia washed the vegetables. She carefully cut them. She lit the fire. She placed a pot over the flames. She added water. Then rice. Then vegetables. Then spices. Slowly, the delicious smell filled the little cottage. Lavanya prepared 7 plates. She poured water into 7 cups. She cleaned the table. She swept the floor. She made all 7 beds. When she finished, she was exhausted. She looked at one of the little beds. "I will rest for just a moment," she whispered. She lay down. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Leaves rustled softly. A distant bird called. The little cottage was warm and peaceful. Lavanya slowly closed her eyes and fell asleep. The 7 dwarfs return. Late that evening, 7 little men were walking through the forest. They were 7 dwarfs. Every day they worked deep inside the mountain. They searched for gold. They searched for precious stones. They worked with rocks and minerals. By the end of every day, they were exhausted. That evening was no different. One dwarf said, "I am so hungry." Another replied, "So am I." A third said, "I wish we had a warm meal waiting for us." They continued walking. Soon they reached their cottage. But the first dwarf suddenly stopped. "Wait." Everyone stopped. "What is it?" He pointed toward the house. "Our door is open." The dwarfs looked at one another. Slowly, they entered. And their eyes grew wide. The cottage was spotless. 7 plates of food were waiting. 7 cups were clean. The beds were neatly arranged. One dwarf whispered, "Someone has been here." Another said, "Perhaps a traveler." They quietly walked farther inside. Then, they saw a young girl sleeping peacefully on one of the beds. The 7 dwarfs stood silently. No one woke her. Morning with the 7 dwarfs. The next morning, sunlight entered through the window. Birds began singing. Lavanya slowly opened her eyes. She sat up and saw 7 little dwarfs standing around her. She became frightened. One of them smiled gently. "Do not be afraid." Lavanya asked, "Who are you?" The oldest dwarf answered, "This is our home." Lavanya lowered her head. "I am sorry. I entered without permission." The dwarf smiled. "But you cooked for us." Another dwarf said, "You cleaned our house." Another said, "You even made our beds." Everyone smiled. Lavanya smiled too. And from that day, her new life began. A peaceful new life. Days passed. Every morning, when the sun rose, Lavanya woke up. She opened the windows. Cool forest air entered the cottage. Birds sang outside. She cooked breakfast. The dwarfs went to work. During the day, Lavanya cared for the garden. She watered flowers. She gathered firewood. She cleaned the cottage. And when the sun began to disappear behind the mountains, the 7 dwarfs returned home. They ate together. They talked about their day. One dwarf told funny stories. Another sang songs. Another always talked about food. Lavanya listened quietly. Slowly, she began to forget that she was a princess. She began to think of the 7 dwarfs as her family. The king in the palace. Meanwhile, life continued in the royal palace. Everything looked the same. But the king had changed. He often sat quietly. At dinner, beautiful food was brought before him. Golden plates. Silver bowls. Fresh fruit. Rich sauces. Delicious desserts. But nothing made him happy. One evening, the king tasted his food. Then he stopped. This food has no flavor. The cook became frightened. Your Majesty, everything was prepared perfectly. The king shook his head. Something is missing. Then he remembered Lavanya. He remembered her words. Father, I love you like salt. The king stared out the window. And for the first time, he wondered. Did I misunderstand my daughter? The king enters the forest. One day, the king could wait no longer. He mounted his horse and traveled into the forest. He crossed the mountains. He crossed a river. He followed narrow forest paths. Evening arrived. The king became tired. He was also very hungry. Then, he saw a small light. A little cottage. The king knocked on the door. Knock. Knock. A voice answered. Who is there? The king replied. I am a traveler. The door opened. And the king froze. Standing before him was his daughter, Lavanya. The king is hungry. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lavanya's eyes filled with tears. The king whispered. Lavanya. She answered. Father. She could say nothing more. The king realized. His daughter was still the same gentle girl. But now, there was a peacefulness in her eyes. Lavanya invited him inside. You must be hungry, father. The king nodded. Lavanya went into the kitchen. She prepared rice. She cooked vegetables. She added spices. But she forgot the salt. The food was ready. She placed it before her father. The king began eating. 1 spoon. 2 spoons. Then he stopped. Lavanya. Yes, father. The king looked at her. There is something missing. Lavanya smiled gently. She went into the kitchen. She brought back a small bowl of salt. She added a pinch. Then she gave the food back to him. The king tasted it. And tears filled his eyes. The king understands. The king slowly said. Lavanya. Yes, father. You were not insulting me that day. Lavanya remained silent. The king continued. I finally understand what you meant. You meant that just as food is incomplete without salt, your life would feel incomplete without your father. Lavanya's eyes filled with tears. The king stood up. He embraced his daughter. Forgive me. Lavanya rested her head against his chest. Father. I never hated you. Outside. The wind moved gently through the trees. Moonlight entered through the little window. Inside the cottage. After many years, the distance between father and daughter disappeared. The 7 dwarfs. The 7 dwarfs soon returned home. They were surprised to see the king. Lavanya smiled. This is my father. The 7 dwarfs smiled. The king stood before them. You gave my daughter a home. You protected her. I will always be grateful. The oldest dwarf replied. She became part of our family too. The king smiled. Then you must come home with us. The dwarfs looked at one another. Lavanya said. Father, they are my family. The king replied. Then they are our family too. Return to the palace. The next morning, the king, Lavanya, and the 7 dwarfs began their journey back to the kingdom. They crossed the forest. They crossed the river. They traveled over the mountains. At last, the royal palace appeared in the distance. When the queen saw Lavanya, she ran toward her. Mother and daughter embraced. They held each other for a long time. The 6 sisters stood nearby. They no longer laughed. They looked ashamed. One sister stepped forward. "We treated you unfairly." Another said. "We did not understand you." Lavinia forgave them. Because she had learned. Love is not only about being together during happy moments. Sometimes. Love means forgiving someone after they make a mistake. The Great Feast. That evening. The palace held a magnificent feast. 7 special seats were prepared for the 7 dwarfs. 7 cups. 7 plates. 7 chairs. Just like the little cottage in the forest. In the middle of the table. The king placed a small bowl of salt. Everyone began eating. The king looked at the bowl. Then he smiled. "Today," he said, "I have learned something I will never forget." Everyone looked at him. The king continued. "We should never judge something by its size. A tiny grain can change the flavor of an entire meal." Then he looked at Lavinia. "And a simple sentence can change an entire life." Everyone became quiet. Then they applauded. Lavinia smiled at her father. The last night. Many years passed. One quiet night. A large silver moon appeared above the kingdom. A gentle breeze moved through the royal gardens. The scent of flowers filled the air. The river flowed quietly beyond the palace walls. The king sat beside his window. Before him was a small bowl. Filled with salt. He looked at it. And smiled. Then he closed his eyes. He remembered that long ago evening. 7 daughters. One simple question. One misunderstanding. And one lesson. That changed his entire life. Crescent moon final sleeping ending. The night grew deeper. One by one. The lights in the palace disappeared. The 7 sisters fell asleep. The queen rested peacefully. The king closed his eyes. Far away. The 7 dwarfs turned off the last lamp in their little cottage. The forest trees moved gently in the wind. Leaves whispered softly. "Etitich. Etitich. Etitich." A distant bird gave one final call. Then. Silence. The river continued flowing. The moon remained high above the trees. Stars filled the dark sky. And everyone in the peaceful kingdom slept safely. Lavinia lay quietly beside her window. A gentle smile rested on her face. She knew her father finally understood her. Her family was together again. And beside her heart were the memories of 7 little friends. 7 dwarfs. A little cottage. A great palace. And a tiny bowl of salt. The salt reminded her of something she would never forget. True love does not always shine like gold. It does not always sparkle like diamonds. Sometimes. True love is simple. Quiet. Almost invisible. But without it, everything feels incomplete. So now. Close your eyes. Take a slow breath. Imagine the peaceful forest. Imagine the soft wind moving through the trees. Imagine the little cottage glowing beneath the moonlight. Imagine the 7 dwarfs sleeping peacefully. Imagine the royal palace resting quietly beneath the stars. And imagine Lavinia. Safe. Warm. And peaceful. Everything is all right. Everything is quiet. Everything is safe. The moon slowly crosses the sky. The stars continue to shine. The forest grows quieter. The river flows gently. And the peaceful kingdom slowly disappears into the soft darkness of night. Sleep peacefully. Dream softly. And remember. Sometimes the smallest things carry the greatest love. Good night. Sleep peacefully. And let the quiet kingdom watch over your dreams. Crescent moon sparkles. The end. Once upon a time, far away from the noisy cities, beyond 7 quiet hills, and beside a wide, silver-colored river, there was a beautiful kingdom called Nurabad. It was a peaceful kingdom. A very peaceful kingdom. The people of Nurabad did not live in fear. They did not wake up to the sound of war. They did not hear angry voices in the streets. Instead, every morning, they heard birds singing. They heard the soft sound of the river. They heard the bells of distant shepherds. And when evening came, the whole kingdom slowly became quiet. The houses closed their wooden windows. The lanterns were lit. Children fell asleep beside their mothers. Farmers returned from the fields. And the palace, standing on a gentle hill above the kingdom, became silent beneath the moonlight. The kingdom was ruled by a kind king named Arman. And beside him lived his beloved queen, Queen Lala. King Arman and Queen Lala loved each other deeply. They were gentle rulers. They listened to their people. They never wanted unnecessary riches. They never wanted war. They wanted only one thing: peace. And Nurabad had plenty of it. There were green gardens around the palace. There were fountains made of white stone. There were rose bushes beside the palace walls. There were tall trees where birds built their nests. And in the evenings, when the sun disappeared behind the hills, the palace windows reflected the golden light of sunset. Everything seemed perfect. Almost perfect. Because there was one quiet sadness in the palace. The king and queen had no child. Years passed. And still, the palace nursery remained empty. There were no little footsteps running through the corridors. No small laughter in the gardens. No little hands reaching toward the palace fountains. The king never complained. The queen never blamed anyone. But sometimes, late at night, when the entire palace was asleep, Queen Lala would stand beside her window. She would look at the moon, and quietly whisper, "Perhaps one day." Then she would smile softly, and return to her bed. The king knew her heart. He would hold her hand. And together, they would sit in silence. They had everything. Yet they were waiting for one small blessing. A child. A little voice. A little life. A little light in their peaceful home. Many years passed peacefully. King Arman became known as the King of Peace. Whenever two villages had an argument, he listened to both sides. Whenever a farmer lost his harvest, the palace helped him. Whenever a family needed food, the royal kitchens prepared extra meals. Queen Lala was equally loved. She often walked through the palace gardens. She spoke to gardeners. She visited the kitchens. She helped poor families. She loved flowers more than jewels. Her favorite flower was the white water lily. Every morning, a gardener placed fresh lilies in a small golden vase beside her window. Queen Lala would look at them and smile. She often wondered why she loved them so much. Perhaps because the water lily was peaceful. It floated quietly on water. It never rushed. It never fought. It simply opened its petals. When the morning light arrived, one spring morning, Queen Lala stood beside the palace pond. The surface of the water was perfectly still. A white lily floated in the middle. The queen leaned closer. A small butterfly landed on one of its petals. She smiled. Then she heard footsteps behind her. It was King Arman. He came slowly toward her. "Good morning, Lala." "Good morning, my king." They stood beside the pond. Neither spoke for a while. The morning breeze moved through the trees. Leaves whispered softly. The fountain made a gentle sound. Finally, the king said, "Do you remember what you wished for last spring?" The queen smiled. "I remember." "And the spring before that?" "I remember that too." The king looked down. "I wish I could give you what your heart wants." Queen Lala gently placed her hand over his. "You already have." The king looked at her. "What do you mean?" "You gave me peace." She smiled. "You gave me kindness." Then she looked toward the flowers. "And you gave me a home where I can wait without fear." The king smiled sadly. That morning, they stayed beside the pond for a long time. They watched the white lilies move with the breeze. Neither of them knew that something unusual was about to happen. Something that would change their lives forever.
That evening, the sky became dark earlier than usual. A cool wind traveled through the kingdom. The palace guard stood beside the great wooden gates. The moon was beginning to rise. Suddenly, one guard noticed someone walking toward the palace. An old man. He wore a long brown cloak. His beard was white. His walking stick was made from dark wood. He walked slowly. But there was something strange about him. The guard called out, "Who are you?" The old man stopped. He looked toward the palace. Then he smiled. "I am only a traveler." The guard asked, "Where are you traveling?" The old man answered, "Wherever the road takes me." The guard was unsure. But before he could say anything, the king appeared at the gate. King Arman had seen the traveler from the palace balcony. "Let him enter." The guards opened the gates. The old dervish walked inside. The king approached him. "You are welcome in Nurabad." The dervish bowed. "May peace remain in your kingdom." The king smiled. "You must be tired." "I am." "Come inside." The dervish was taken to the palace. The servants brought him warm food. They gave him water. They prepared a comfortable room. But before going to sleep, the dervish asked to speak privately with the king and queen. The king and queen sat across from him. The room was quiet. A small fire burned in the fireplace. The dervish looked at them for a long moment. Then he said, "You are kind people." The king nodded. "We try to be. You have ruled this land with patience." The queen smiled. "We only wish our people happiness." The dervish looked toward the queen. Then he said softly, "Yet there is one empty room in this palace." The queen's eyes became still. The king looked at the floor. The dervish continued, "Do not be sad." The queen whispered, "We are not." The dervish smiled. "Sometimes," he said, "what is meant for us takes a longer road." Then he reached into his cloak. He took out a small silver-colored bowl. Inside it was clear water. The queen looked at it curiously. The dervish said, "Beyond your kingdom, at the far end of the eastern forest, there is a hidden pond." The king listened carefully. "In that pond," continued the dervish, "grows a very special water lily." The queen looked at him. "What is special about it?" The dervish smiled. "It blooms only under the moon. Only one flower blooms each year. And it opens its petals when the moon is highest." The king asked, "What must we do?" The dervish looked at Queen Lala. Bring one flower from that pond. The queen's heart began beating faster. Then? The dervish said. Bring it home. Place it beside your bed. And when the flower opens, you must make your wish. The king asked.
Will our wish come true? The dervish smiled. Some wishes, he said, are heard by people. Some wishes, he continued, are heard by the sky. And some, he whispered, are heard only by a mother's heart. The room became silent. The queen's eyes filled with tears. The dervish stood. Go when the moon is full. Follow the old forest path. You will find the pond. But remember. The king asked. What? Do not take more than one flower. Do not harm the pond. And never forget to give thanks. The king nodded. We will remember. The dervish smiled. Then your journey has already begun. The next morning, the palace became busy. But not with soldiers. Not with weapons. There was no army. King Arman decided to travel simply. He would go with Queen Lala and 2 trusted companions. They prepared a small carriage. They packed bread, fresh fruit, water, warm blankets, a lantern, and a small silver bowl. The queen also carried a blue silk cloth. She did not know why. But she felt that she would need it. Before leaving, she walked through the palace garden. She touched the roses. She looked at the fountain. She stood beside her favorite white lilies. Then she whispered, I will return. The king waited beside the carriage. The queen entered. The palace gates opened. Slowly, the carriage began moving. They traveled beyond the palace. Past the houses. Past the farms. Past the golden fields. The kingdom slowly disappeared behind them. Ahead, the forest waited. It was called the Silent Forest. People rarely entered it. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was very deep. The trees were ancient. Some were so large that several people could stand beneath their branches. The road became narrower. The sunlight became softer. Birdsong replaced the sound of people. The carriage moved slowly. The queen looked through the window. Trees passed by. Green leaves moved in the breeze. Small flowers grew beside the road. A rabbit appeared for a moment. Then disappeared into the bushes. The king smiled. Perhaps the forest knows we are coming. The queen smiled back. Perhaps. By sunset, they reached an old wooden bridge. Beyond it, the road became too narrow for the carriage. They stopped. The companions prepared the horses. The king and queen continued on foot. They carried their lanterns. The forest became darker. But the moon was rising. Its silver light passed between the branches. The queen held the king's hand. They walked slowly. There was no need to hurry. The dervish had told them. The flower would open only when the moon reached its highest point. So they had plenty of time. They walked. And walked. Until they heard something. Water. A soft sound. Drip. 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 The queen stopped. Do you hear that? The king smiled. I do. They followed the sound. The trees opened. And there, beneath the moonlight, was the hidden pond. Chapter 4, The Moonlit Pond. The pond was more beautiful than anything they had ever seen. It was perfectly round. Tall trees surrounded it. Moonlight covered the surface like silver silk. There were small stones around the edge. Tiny fireflies floated above the grass. And in the center, there was one white water lily. Only one. Its petals were still closed. The queen stood silently. She could not speak. The king whispered. "Is that it?" She nodded. They walked toward the pond. The water was clear. They could see tiny fish swimming beneath the surface. The queen knelt beside the water. She did not touch the flower. She simply watched. The moon rose higher. The forest became quieter. Even the insects seemed to stop. Then, slowly, one white petal moved. The queen held her breath. Another petal opened. Then another. The flower slowly unfolded beneath the moon. Its center seemed to glow softly. Not brightly. Not magically like lightning. Just a gentle light. Like a candle behind thin white cloth. The queen whispered. "So beautiful." The king placed his hand on her shoulder. They waited. When the flower fully opened, a soft breeze crossed the pond. The petals moved. The queen remembered the dervish's words. She carefully reached toward the flower. But before touching it, she whispered, "Forgive me for taking you from your home." Then she gently picked the flower. The king opened the blue silk cloth. The queen placed the flower inside. They thanked the pond. They thanked the forest. They thanked the unseen blessing that had brought them there. Then they began their journey home. The moon followed them through the trees. And the forest remained peaceful behind them. Chapter 5, The Wish. When they returned to the palace, it was almost midnight. The entire palace was sleeping. The king and queen entered their chamber. Queen Lala carefully placed the white water lily in the silver bowl. She filled it with fresh water. Then she placed it beside the bed. The room became quiet. The moonlight entered through the window. The queen looked at the flower. The king stood beside her. "What will you wish for?" She smiled. "I think you already know." The king smiled. They sat together. They did not ask for gold. They did not ask for a bigger kingdom. They did not ask for long life. They simply closed their eyes. And together, they wished for a child. A child who would grow up with kindness. A child who would love peace. A child who would never forget the poor. A child who would bring happiness to their home. Then they waited. Nothing happened. The flower simply floated in the bowl. The king smiled. Perhaps the dervish was only telling us a story. The queen shook her head. No. She looked at the flower. Sometimes, she said, we must wait. So they waited. The days passed. 1 week. Then another. The flower remained fresh. The servants were amazed. Normally, a water lily would not remain beautiful for so long. But this one did. It stayed white. It stayed fresh. And every night, under the moonlight, it seemed to glow softly. The king and queen continued their peaceful lives. They did not become impatient. They did not demand an answer. They simply waited. Chapter 6, The Gift of Spring. Months passed. Winter came. Then winter slowly disappeared. Spring returned to Nurabad. Flowers opened in the gardens. Birds returned to the trees. The river became bright beneath the morning sun. And one peaceful morning, Queen Lala woke before sunrise. She felt something different. The palace was unusually quiet. She walked toward the window. The first rays of sunlight entered the room. Then she heard a sound. A tiny sound. A baby's cry. The queen froze. She turned around. The room was empty. Then she heard it again. A gentle cry. She walked toward the inner room. The king was already there. He stood beside a small cradle. And inside was a baby. A beautiful little child. The queen covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. The king looked at her. He was crying too. Neither spoke. They simply stood there. For a long moment. They looked at their child. Then the queen slowly approached. She touched the baby's tiny hand. The baby opened her eyes. And smiled. The king whispered. "She is here." The queen looked toward the old water lily. It had finally closed. Its petals rested quietly on the water. Then a soft breeze entered through the window. The flower moved once. And became still. The queen understood. The blessing had arrived. Chapter 7, Princess Noor. The child was named Princess Noor. Noor meant light. And she truly became the light of the palace. From the day she arrived, the palace changed. The corridors were no longer completely silent. There were tiny footsteps. There were soft laughs. There were toys in the garden. There were little blankets beside the fireplace. The king became a different man. He still ruled wisely. But now, every evening, he hurried home. Queen Lala became even happier. She taught Noor about flowers. She taught her to be gentle with animals. She taught her to share. And the king taught her about justice. Never judge someone by their clothes, he told her. Listen to their heart. Noor grew up surrounded by love. She never became spoiled. She never demanded unnecessary things. When she saw a poor child, she shared her food. When she saw an injured bird, she asked the servants to help it. When she saw an old farmer working alone, she stopped to speak with him. The people loved her. They called her the little light of Nurabad. Chapter 8, The Second Visit to the Forest. One evening, when Princess Noor was 7 years old, she asked her mother, "Where did I come from?" The queen smiled. "From love." Noor laughed. "No, Mama. I mean, where was I born?" The queen looked toward the moonlit window. She knew that one day, she would tell Noor the entire story. That night, she told her about the dervish. She told her about the silent forest. She told her about the hidden pond. And she told her about the magical water lily. Noor listened carefully. "Can we go there?" The queen smiled. "One day." "Promise?" "I promise." Years later, when Noor was old enough, the family returned to the forest. The old road was still there. The trees were still tall. The pond was still hidden. And when they reached it, Noor stood silently. The pond looked exactly as her mother had described. Moonlight floated across the water. White lilies rested on the surface. Noor knelt beside the pond. She did not pick anything. Instead, she placed her hands together. "Thank you," she whispered. Her mother smiled. "What are you thanking?" Noor looked at the water. "For bringing me home." The king and queen smiled. They sat beside her. For a while, the three of them simply watched the pond. The forest whispered around them. The moon climbed higher. And somewhere in the trees, a night bird began singing. Chapter 9, The Old Dervish Returns. Many years passed. Princess Noor became a young woman. She was beautiful. But more importantly, she was kind. One evening, the palace gates opened. An old traveler entered. The guards did not recognize him. But King Arman did. The king hurried toward him. "It is you." The dervish smiled. "Yes." Queen Lala came behind the king. She bowed. "You came back." The dervish looked around the palace. Then he smiled. "I wanted to see whether the flower had done its work." The king laughed softly. "The flower gave us more than we could have imagined." The dervish looked toward Princess Noor. She approached him. "Are you the one who helped my parents?" The dervish smiled. "I only showed them the road." Noor asked. "Did the flower give me to them?" The dervish shook his head. "No." He looked at her gently. "Love did." Noor smiled. The dervish continued. "The flower was only a reminder. A reminder that some beautiful things require patience. Some blessings take time. And some journeys must be walked before we understand why we were sent." Noor listened carefully. The dervish stayed at the palace that night. The next morning, he left before sunrise. No one knew where he went. But the king never forgot him. Chapter 10, The Kingdom of Light. Years later, King Arman grew old. Queen Lala's hair became silver. But Noor remained beside them. She learned everything her father knew. She learned how to listen. How to forgive. How to make peace. How to care for ordinary people. Eventually, Noor became queen. And she continued the tradition of peace. She never forgot the hidden pond. Every year, on the night of the full moon, she traveled to the silent forest. She did not take the flowers. She simply sat beside the water. She listened. Sometimes, she went alone. Sometimes, she brought children from the kingdom. She taught them an important lesson. Do not always ask the world to give you something. Sometimes, she said, sit quietly. Listen. Be grateful. Let the answer come in its own time. The people remembered her words. And Nurabad remained peaceful. Chapter 11, The Last Night of the Story. One quiet night. Many years later, Queen Noor sat beside her palace window. The kingdom was sleeping. The moon was bright. The river reflected the stars. She remembered her parents. She remembered the old dervish. She remembered the hidden pond. And she remembered the first water lily. A servant entered quietly. "Your Majesty." Noor turned. "Yes. Would you like anything?" She smiled. "No." She looked outside. "Everything is peaceful." The servant bowed and left. Queen Noor closed her eyes. She listened to the night. The wind moved through the trees. A fountain whispered in the garden. Far away, an owl called once. Then everything became quiet again. Noor smiled. She realized something. The greatest magic had never been the flower. The greatest magic had been patience, kindness, love, and hope. Final scene, the silent pond. And now, far away from the palace, deep inside the silent forest, the hidden pond still rests beneath the moon. The water is calm. The trees stand quietly around it. Fireflies float above the grass. And white water lilies drift gently across the surface. One flower opens. Slowly. Very slowly. Petal by petal. The moonlight touches it. The pond becomes silver. The forest becomes still. There is no hurry. No noise. No fear. Only peace. And if you listen carefully, you may hear the soft sound of the water. A gentle breeze. Moving through the leaves. A distant bird. Singing one final song before sleep. The kingdom is resting. The palace is resting. The gardens are resting. The river is resting. And the little village houses, one by one, have gone dark. Everyone is asleep. The old king's stories are finished. The queen's garden is quiet. The princess's palace is peaceful. And somewhere, deep inside the forest, the magical water lily continues to float. Quietly. Peacefully. Patiently. Just as it did many years ago. And perhaps, that is the secret it was always trying to teach. You do not have to hurry. You do not have to know everything tonight. Some things need time. Some dreams need patience. Some journeys take longer than expected. And some of the most beautiful blessings arrive quietly, when you are finally ready to receive them. So, close your eyes. Let your breathing become slow. Imagine the silver moon above the forest. Imagine the peaceful pond. Imagine the white lily floating gently on the water. The breeze is soft. The night is warm. The kingdom is safe. Everything is quiet. Everything is peaceful. And you can simply rest. The moon remains above the trees. The water remains still. The flower continues floating. And the story, slowly, slowly, comes to an end. Good night. Sleep peacefully. And may your dreams be as gentle as a white water lily floating beneath the moon. The end.